Thank you for joining part one of our three-part young adult series. Tonight we'll be looking at investing in our future. Thank you to our presenters, as well as our sponsors that support our young adult series, and all of you for joining us tonight. For those of you who are new to Can Do MS, we deliver health and wellness education programs to help families with MS thrive. Please visit the Can Do MS website, cando-ms.org, to learn more about our online and nationwide in-person programs. And with those housekeeping items out of the way, I'm thrilled to introduce our two speakers this evening, Steve Nissen and Roz Kalb. And I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves. And thank you so much for being here. And I'll turn it over to Steve and Roz. Good evening.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm Roz Kalb. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I've been with Can Do for 16 or so years, but in the field of MS for close to 40. And I'm thrilled to be doing the webinar tonight with Steve Nissen, whom I've known for quite a few years and always enjoy working with.
Thank you so much, Roz, and thank you so much, Brian, for letting me join you all tonight. Steve Nissen, I am the Director of MS Navigator Services Delivery with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society. I've actually been with the society for over 21 years, so Roz, that's probably the number of years that you and I have gone back. And really my background is that of a vocational rehabilitation counselor, so really kind of focusing in on the employment considerations for folks who are living with MS and living with other sorts of disabilities. So thanks for letting me be a part of this program tonight. So Brian mentioned the title of tonight's program is to invest in your future. And, as we definitely know that, as a young adult, you may think about kind of your investments in terms of retirement planning and bank accounts and the like, but as a person who is living with MS, or as a support partner of someone who's living with MS, there are some additional some investments that we're going to talk about that can really hopefully help guide you now and sometime in the future. And you see here what those three primary topics are going to be: health and wellness, your support network, and your employment and the career planning. So we'll start off just briefly talking about our learning objectives, and then we're going to go to a quick polling. So actually, Roz and I can just learn a little bit more about you all tonight. We are so, first of all, just to kind of put into perspective, we're so thankful to have this time with younger people with MS. This is such a critical time just to try to get connected, try to get the information that you need. So you see here from these objectives, just some of the kind of like overarching goals that we're going to work on tonight, or that we're going to talk about tonight, really thinking proactively in terms of various components of your life, particularly in regard to your working and your career planning, not having to navigate your MS by yourself, and the importance of supports to include medical team, your social supports, as well as just learning ways that you can live well with MS. So for Roz and I to get to know you all a little bit better, we're going to put up a quick polling question. So if you could just tell us who you are, who is participating. Are you a person with MS? Are you a support partner? Are you the person with MS and your support partner watching this webinar together? Or are you some other category of person who might just be interested in this topic? So we'll give you a couple seconds to respond.
Yep, and for those viewing on their computer, a pop-up should have just appeared, so you can answer right on your screen there, and we'll give you another 10 seconds to reply, and we'll see who we have this evening.
Okay, so it looks like that the majority of people with MS, the majority of people participating are people who are living with MS themselves, about 75%. Great to see some support partners. Love seeing people listening to this together. Again, hopefully this will just be kind of the beginning of the conversation. We're going to present some ideas, and we hope that you're going to be able to take action on this, and hopefully just talk to those important people in your life about it. So Roz, I'm going to actually turn the floor over to you for a few minutes, just to kind of introduce the concept of resilience with our group tonight.
Thanks, Steve. I'm also glad to see some support marchers joining in and couples watching together, because these are all important topics for you to be discussing together. So what we're really talking about tonight is investments that you can make to help you and your family be more resilient in the face of what we all know is the unpredictability of MS. When I worked as a therapist for many years, people would say to me most often, I just want to know what's going to happen next. If I just knew what was going to happen, I could handle it, or if I knew that things weren't going to change from the way they are today. But we know that MS, being what it is, its hallmark is its unpredictability. And so the goal of everything we're going to talk about tonight is how to help you feel more prepared, more resilient with all of that unpredictability in front of you. So resilience can be defined as a person's ability to get back on your feet, to recover quickly when there are setbacks or there are unexpected changes, which can happen often with a disease like MS, and also to cope and adapt and problem solve and keep moving forward in spite of changes that happen or losses that happen. And the good news about resilience is that one can actually cultivate it, can develop it. Some people may be born a little bit more resilient than others, but the good news from the research is that it is something that you can enhance on your own. And so we want to help tonight by talking about some investments that you can make. So as Steve listed them out before, we're going to talk first about the ways you can invest in your health and wellness, how you can build a comprehensive support network, which is always something that's in progress, right? The support network grows and changes over time. And also how you can plan actively around your employment and career to try and protect that very, very important role in your life. And these investments aren't just for the person living with MS, they're for support partners as well, because as one support partner said to us recently, this is not a me disease, it's a we disease. So the unpredictability and the changes affect all of you. So the first investment that we're talking about is health and wellness. And I think there are several areas of this that are really important for you to focus on. We have a tendency to get tunnel vision around MS. Healthcare providers can have this tunnel vision, and so can individuals who have been diagnosed with MS. Clearly, one could do very well without having any other health issues in one's life, but nature doesn't work that way. So it's not just important to take care of your MS, but to manage your overall well-being. So you're starting with managing the disease itself. We encourage everybody to get on and stay on a disease-modifying therapy as early in the disease course as possible. That is probably the very, very best investment that you can make in your future to slow or prevent progression. But in the meantime, you also need to manage relapses, also called attacks or exacerbations that can occur, so that you can get back on your feet quickly and not have those that flare up of symptoms interfere with your functioning at work or at home. And managing symptoms is an ongoing process. Your healthcare team can work with you to help you manage the symptoms as effectively and comfortably as possible, so that you can function as you want to in your everyday life. So that's your neurologist and your nurse practitioner or your other advanced practice person who's really working with you, along with the rehabilitation folks, the occupational therapists, the physical therapists, speech language pathologists, who can help you manage the symptoms of your MS. And in addition to that, we know that at the time of diagnosis, people with MS are likely to have more other health conditions in addition to their MS. These are referred to as comorbid conditions, and the research shows that they're more common in people with MS than in the general population. And they're very, very important because particularly the ones you see on the screen, the vascular comorbidities, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, they can in fact affect the progress of your MS, so that people who have these conditions and they aren't monitoring them and controlling them well will find that their disease may progress more quickly. And when they manage them well, the disease progress can slow down. So it's very important to have a primary care physician as well as your MS to manage those conditions, and also to have regular checkups to detect any health issues that might come along. This is a very important investment for all of you, as is eating and sleeping well to just keep yourself as healthy as possible with a heart-healthy diet, which is what we currently recommend in MS, and adequate rest. And of course, regular exercise and lots of physical activity. So these are all ways that you can keep yourself as healthy and well as possible. This number may startle all of you, but it is true that virtually every person with MS can benefit from a minimum of 150 minutes per week of exercise and or physical activity, preferably 150 minutes of each. These are published guidelines for people with MS, and a physical therapist can help you determine what might be the best physical activity and or exercise regimen for you to engage in. We also want you to pay attention to your mood, because people with MS, we know, are at much greater risk of depression than the general population. More than 50% of people with MS are going to have a major depression at some point. And it's important to be aware of that, to be screened for it regularly and treated if depression becomes something that you're dealing with, because it's hard enough to live with an unpredictable, challenging illness like multiple sclerosis without trying to do it under the black cloud of depression. And we also want you to pay very close attention to your thinking and memory, your cognition, because 65% of people with MS do experience some changes in their cognition. And this is very relevant to some of the other investments we're going to ask you to make, because cognitive changes are among the most important reasons that people end up leaving the workforce early. In addition to fatigue, cognitive changes cause more problems in the workforce than any other MS symptoms. And these cognitive changes can occur early, even as a first symptom of MS. So again, as with mood, we encourage people to talk to their healthcare providers about being screened for changes in their cognition, beginning at the time of diagnosis and then regularly thereafter.
Roz, if I could just kind of jump in here too, and Brian, if you could maybe just go back a slide, because I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what sorts of assistance referrals that the National MS Society through the MS Navigator program, which you're going to see on the next slide, but just kind of just to make sure that people know that by contacting the National MS Society, by connecting actually with an MS Navigator, we can actually refer folks, we can actually register them for community-based wellness programs. To some of the points on the previous slide, we can actually refer them to the healthcare providers that are familiar with MS, whether you're looking for a neurologist or a physical therapist or maybe like an occupational therapist. We do have very extensive literature and brochures really focusing on wellness This is something that definitely we as an organization, that by connecting actually with one of the MS Navigators, we can provide you with this information about diet and nutrition and exercise. So this is important, and we also, again, to start to kind of to set the stage, the Society and MS Navigator can serve as a resource that you can contact in order to get more connected to these resources, to these professionals that might be able to help guide you as you're going through this. So to talk about MS Navigator, and again, it seems, you know, we just thought that probably this would be a good time just to flesh out a little bit more what kind of the MS Navigator is before we get too far into the program, because you're going to hear me talk at various stages ways that by connecting with an MS Navigator, we might be able to provide support and information and resources. So you see here really kind of the goal, or what really the MS Navigator service or program does. Really, we exist, and again, this is kind of our benchmark program of the National MS Society, really because we know that people with MS, and it's not just people who are living with MS, but anybody who's connected to that person, faces challenges, and we want them to feel connected to the information, the resources, and the folks that they need in order to truly to live their best lives, and in order to move their lives forward. The MS Navigators are comprised of a truly nationwide team, so this is a service that's available regardless of where somebody lives in the United States, comprised of skilled, highly skilled, compassionate folks that work to connect people who are affected by MS, to include their support partners to the information, the resources, and the supports that they're looking for. We really do work kind of with each person uniquely to determine what the specific services or supports that they're looking for. This could be everything from just providing some information and some education to help people to kind of like advocate for what they need to get connected to those healthcare professionals. We can provide the emotional support and the resources. Like Roz mentioned, just be aware of mood. We do have different resources and supports that we can provide to people with MS and their support partners. We can provide referrals. We have resources to assist people in facing the financial challenges that come with MS. We definitely know that multiple sclerosis is an extremely costly condition. So we are familiar with some of the financial resources and can connect people to financial planning resources just to help them plan for the future. You see here just a few of the different ways that our constituents can connect and can get connected to an MS Navigator through phone, through email, through chat, social media. We really do kind of realize that people affected by MS might want to connect with an MS Navigator in different ways. So some people might be looking to the website to connect with us that way. Some people might choose to pick up the phone and connect with an MS Navigator to work on specific goals that they're or challenges that they're facing. And we definitely know that sometimes for the most complex or challenging situations, that's where by connecting with an MS Navigator, we can also connect them to a contracted case manager. So we really talk about kind of that continuum of support, and kind of that entry point is by connecting actually to an MS Navigator. So that's my little plug, and you'll kind of hear me talk at other times about just ways that navigators can support. But Roz, I'm going to actually throw it back to you just to kind of introduce our first couple.
Okay, so before I do that, I just we will make sure that when the PDF of the slides goes out, that you have the phone number and the email address and everything you need to reach an MS Navigator. And any of you who've heard me talk before know that I think this is a magic 800 number, because all the things that Steve said really do happen for people, so that no one has to feel as though he or she is doing this alone. So now I want to introduce you to Beth and Ethan. Beth is a young attorney. She has relapsing remitting MS. She and Ethan have been married for 5 years, and they have one young daughter. Beth was diagnosed 3 years ago after she had vision symptoms and was given a diagnosis of optic neuritis. Right now, 3 years later, she's dealing with a lot of fatigue, eye pain, and impaired vision resulting from the optic neuritis. And she's having trouble cognitively. She struggles with organization and memory, which is difficult for an attorney. And she's been pretty depressed about all these changes, but also because depression is one of the most common symptoms of MS, not just a reaction to it. And she is experiencing that depression now. Ethan is 35. He is an accountant, and he has a history of cardiac disease in his family. So he's very mindful of his own health. He's feeling overwhelmed by life at the moment. He's very worried about his wife. He's eager to get a promotion at work because he's concerned about whether Beth is going to be able to continue to work. And so his career growth is very, very important to the family. But at the same time, he's had to take on more of the household and parenting activities just because Beth is dealing with so much fatigue. He did recently hear from his primary care physician that his blood pressure is elevated, as is his cholesterol. So now all of you have been introduced to Beth and Ethan. And if you were advising them what to do, what would you think that they should do first? Focus on Beth's MS, build the support network for both of them, engage in some employment and career planning, make appointments with their primary care physicians, or make an appointment with a family counselor. What would you advise them to do first? Very interesting. Okay, so almost half of you recommend that Beth and Ethan work on building their support network. But the others are pretty close. Focusing on Beth's MS got the same number of votes as making an appointment with a family counselor. And I guess the last in line, but not that different, is engaging in employment and career planning. So from my perspective, and Steve, please weigh in here, but from my perspective, there's no real right answer here. All of these things are going to be very important for them to do, all of them. But what I like about your answer about building a support network is that I think that's the starting place, right? Because the support network is all of the people you need in your life to help you move forward. So it includes your healthcare team, your family, your friends, other people with MS, anybody that you can find who provides the support you need, including an MS Navigator, for example. So Steve, do you have any comments you want to make about these numbers?
No, I was just thinking the same thing. I mean, they're definitely all things for, Beth and Ethan to focus on. So I would totally agree, Roz, with everything that you were saying.
So one final thought: the number for engaging in employment and career planning is lower, and I just want to throw in a word here because you'll hear it more from Steve later. But this is the time when Beth might actually want to get some counseling about her employment and career, because she may find that the cognitive problems and the fatigue she's having make it impossible for her to function at the level she's used to functioning at work. So she may need to consult sooner rather than later with somebody who can talk to her about requesting reasonable accommodations at work or thinking about a slightly different career path. But again, you'll hear more about that from Steve. I just wanted you to think in terms of how Beth needs to be thinking proactively about her work.
And Roz, I will definitely piggyback off of that. I think that's one of the key things. Oftentimes, we meaning the MS Navigators, and we do have a specialized team that focuses in on benefits and employment and insurance. So oftentimes we are not being contacted until someone is facing some sort of an employment crisis. So we always strongly encourage people to think proactively about their employment planning and their employment concerns. We want people to know that it's never too soon to start doing your research and planning for the what ifs.
Great. So now we're going to look at investment number 2. And this is your support network. So actually we were thinking that support network was pretty important, just like the rest of you were. So we just want you to think as broadly as possible about the support network. It's obviously friends and family. You start with sort of your inner circle and look there for your support. At least that's what most people do. And you need to educate those around you about what your MS is like and what your needs are, because people, no matter how much they love you, can't read your mind. So you need to help them support you in ways that are meaningful to you. You need to let them know when and how to help, and when to let you be on your own because you're actually fine. People need that kind of instruction, because even if they're very well intentioned and care about you very much, they won't always know what's the best way to offer help. And remember, as you build this support network, that these relationships are not all about you, that even as you are building a support network for yourself, you need to continue to be a good support partner for the people around you, like you always have been in the past. MS doesn't change that. And when you have an ideal high-functioning support network, it's filled with people who support each other. They don't just support you. You are all in it together, particularly with your spouses and partners. It's important that you have a support partnership in which you both feel supported and cared for and taken care of. Your healthcare team is part of your support network, and this is why it's so important that you find people that you respect, that you trust. They don't have to have the best bedside manner in the universe. It helps if they do, but you need to pick the qualities that are most important to you and assemble a team that you have confidence in and that you can communicate with about all the things that are important to you. And if you are lucky enough to go to an MS Comprehensive Care Center, you'll find that this team of professionals does work together with you at sort of the center of their treatment efforts. But if you are not at a comprehensive care center, then you have to find these various providers, the neurologist, the nurse, physical therapist, occupational therapist, and so on, and you have to encourage them to work together to optimize your care. And that's not an easy task to do, but it's also something that MS Navigators can be helpful with in giving you tips on how to coordinate your care. And community resources can be wonderful sources of support. It can be your faith-based community. It can be organizations in the community where you go for services or for support. You can look online and find very supportive resources, but you need to be an educated and careful consumer because not all resources are equal, and not all of them are reliable or accurate. And so you need to talk to your healthcare team or an MS Navigator to sort of sort out the wheat from the chaff and make sure that you're putting your trust in the most reliable resources. So this support network is quite large, and you'll see that there are many different components of it. But Steve, if you could just call out, as you were doing before, the ones in particular where the MS Navigator can help people find what they need.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. You know, and we wanted to put this in here just to show you what one person support network might look like. Again, this might look different for you, but I'm going to talk about a few on this slide and then a few on the next just to go into a little more detail. But the medical team, you have already kind of heard me talk about. We do maintain very extensive referral lists, so we can't specifically recommend one physician over the other, but we do maintain very extensive referral lists. That could be neurologists, like I mentioned before, physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists. We do also have certain medical practices that are designated to be what is called a partner in MS care. So again, like what Roz was saying, some of these practices may have that multidisciplinary composition. The Connections program, I'll just talk about here. We can actually connect folks to community-based self-help groups. We do have like an online community that is actually called MS Connection, msconnection.org. So this is a neighborhood. We have blogs, we have kind of online support groups. People can post questions. And then we do also provide within the community just some face-to-face in-person programs. So again, that's where we really recognize the importance of people with MS, support partners, people that are going through similar things, having that opportunity to meet face-to-face can go very, very far. The employer and coworkers, obviously I'm going to talk more about that here in just a couple of minutes, but know that we definitely do have very extensive resources and referrals in regard to working and employment. We have some information that's geared towards the employer too. Just again, kind of realizing that importance that many times your coworkers, your employers can serve as a big support. So what is it that you can do to maybe educate them on how they can best support you? The community agencies, the MS advocacy or organizations, I'm going to actually talk about on our next slide, just to go in a little more detail about those. So again, we always just want folks to know that there are multiple sclerosis advocacy organizations. Maybe I should have picked that word differently. There are several as opposed to multiple. There are several. So we want people just to be aware, yes, the National MS Society is one, but obviously we partner very closely with Can Do MS. There is also the association and the foundation. So there may be slight differences in terms of what these specific MS-related organizations provide. Some may have cooling programs or different sorts of financial assistance than what the society provides, or wellness programs. So we just strongly encourage people to get informed about the similarities and the differences, and you can avail yourselves of them all. We mentioned on that previous slide the community agencies. 211 is just one that definitely, from an MS Navigator perspective, we do maintain our own referral database. So we maintain specific contact information for resources for social services or housing or community resources, but 211 does serve as a nationwide directory of community-based resources and supports. So you can jump online to the website, you can call them, and just find what's available. And then obviously, since I'm going to go on about workplace issues, I did just want to give a plug here to the state. So within each state, there is a vocational rehabilitation agency. The goal of that office is to assist people with disabilities, not just actually people that are living with MS, but people with all sorts of disabilities in gaining and in maintaining employment. So again, they can definitely support you to get connected to all of these. Again, I'll mention we at the National MS Society feel free to connect actually with one of the MS Navigators, and we can point you in the right direction. We can get you connected. So,
Great.
and Roz is going to talk a little bit more about yet another couple who's building their supports.
So now we're talking about Henry and Isabel. Henry is a lab tech. He's 26 years old, and he and Isabel have been living together for 3 years. He was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS 2 years ago, so a year after they got together. Right now, he's dealing with that fatigue that's so common. He also has numbness and tingling in his hands. He has some weakness and balance problems and bladder urgency. He's told his family and Isabel's parents, but he hasn't really talked to anybody else about his MS. Isabel's a graduate student, a little bit younger than Henry, and she moved to the West Coast from the East to be with Henry. She feels totally committed to him, but she's very worried that he's just not taking good enough care of himself, not being proactive enough about his MS care and his overall health. He's just more laid back, and she's raring to go and take care of all these things. Isabel's parents are very concerned. They don't think she should marry Henry because of his MS. They had heard horror stories about somebody else who is very disabled by MS, so all they can think of is the worst case scenario, and they are very, very worried. So again, we're going to ask your opinion about what Henry and Isabel need to do first to begin building their support network. Yep, hard to go wrong here. Every single one of these is important. I will just put in a plug here for meeting others living with MS. One of the things we've discovered at Can Do when we have our in-person programs is people always say at the end that they love the program and they learn so much from the staff, but they learn even more from each other. They learn from other experts like themselves who live with the disease every single day, and they get tips. So don't minimize the importance of having other people living with MS as part of your support network, and certainly don't minimize the importance of contacting an MS Navigator who can be your sort of window on the world of resources, your connection to all of the things that you might need. But yes, I agree with you. All of the above is important. Okay, Steve, I think it's time. Employment and career planning.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Roz. So just, we definitely know how important employment is to everyone. I know from Roz being the psychologist on this call, would, I'm sure, agree with me in terms of that it's more than just about a paycheck, but it's self-identity, it's sense of self, it's contributing to society, it's feelings of self-worth. When we talk about wellness, again, really thinking back to that, the investment number one, maintaining actually wellness. There is a wellness component in terms of occupational wellness. So, and obviously so many other benefits come from work in terms of paycheck, but also the benefits, health insurance, disability benefits, all those sorts of things. Research shows that the majority of people with MS are leaving the workforce voluntarily and prematurely. So that really kind of gets at this point of be proactive and don't make a rash decision. You want to be thoughtful in terms of being realistic in terms of the potential challenges that you may be experiencing now, or be thinking about possibly how you might be able to manage concerns or challenges as they may present themselves to you in the future. One of the first things that we strongly encourage people to do is to get educated. So you see here some of the most common legal protections that would apply in the United States. So you see here the ADA, Family Medical Leave Act, FMLA, COBRA, just kind of, again, high-level summary of these three primary legal protections. So the Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights piece of legislation that was designed to ensure that people with MS have the same access and the same opportunities as people without disabilities. There are different sections or titles, but Title I does really focus in on the employment setting. So key provisions of this law do deal with things like disclosure and reasonable accommodations. Certain criteria does need to be met in terms of the type of employer and the size of the employer. The Family and Medical Leave Act, this again is a law that would offer job protected leave. It is leave without pay. But this may be especially useful to someone who may be missing time if they have maybe used all of their personal leave or their sick leave due to an exacerbation, due to going through the diagnosis process, and they need to take some additional time off of work. What's important to realize with the FMLA is that this protection does apply not just to the person who's living with MS, but also to family members. So again, this can be a very powerful job retention or job protection law that people might choose to tap into. Again, similar to the ADA, there are certain criteria to meet in terms of the number of employees and how long that you've worked for that particular company. COBRA, the last primary law that we like to provide some general basic education about is the law that kind of allows for the continuation of health insurance. We know that, again, going back to what we've been talking about tonight, even maintaining that focus on your health and your wellness, so oftentimes maintaining good insurance is critical. So we know that this is such an important topic for people who are living with MS. Again, there are certain criteria to meet in terms of number of employees and the circumstances under which a person actually leaves. But these are things that we want people to know are there to help and that people would be able to avail themselves. You see here using these resources, and I joke sometimes a little about this looks like a little bit of kind of like alphabet soup, but what's key to know is that you don't need to navigate these sorts of challenges, these career decisions, or these career crossroads alone. The National MS Society, you've heard me already talk about the MS Navigator. JN stands for the Job Accommodation Network, which is a federally funded program that people can receive personalized assistance and information about the ADA, about disclosure, can help brainstorm reasonable accommodations. VR, I mentioned that before, again, the goal of assisting people with disabilities in gaining and maintaining employment. These last two resources you see here, the EEOC and FIPAs, those are some of the resources that a person might need to avail themselves if they feel like that they're being discriminated against. We know that it still does happen. So again, we want people to know that they don't have to navigate those challenges by themselves. Disclosure is probably one of the most common questions that we get and that people may grapple with at some point in their career living and working, obviously with MS. Disclosure is a little bit of a double-edged sword. The ADA says that a person doesn't have to disclose if they don't want or need any type of a reasonable accommodation, but to receive those accommodations, the protections, then a person does need to disclose. So this is definitely a topic that we strongly encourage people to be thoughtful about, to think it through. We like people to be aware of both the legal reasons for disclosure versus the emotional or the practical reasons that a person might choose to actually disclose. Again, from a legal perspective, to request request reasonable accommodations under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and to identify yourself as a person with a disability. The emotional or kind of the practical reasons, sometimes people just want to reduce their stress, fear of the unknown, feel like that they're keeping a secret. So they would prefer to talk it through just in case they need to avail themselves of the protections. I always say disclosure is a personal choice. We can never tell you, yes, now's the time to disclose, or no, it's not. But really what we do by contacting an MS Navigator or by contacting Jan or one of the other resources is to, okay, what's going on that's making you think it's time to disclose or not? And let's come up with a decision that works for you. So disclosure and accommodations do go hand in hand. They dovetail together. Really, it's essentially what a reasonable accommodation is a modification to the work environment or the way that that essential job function is performed. It must be reasonable, so it can't be extremely costly or disruptive to the employer. This unfortunately does vary greatly from employer to employer. But I think what's important to realize is that the bulk of the responsibility does fall on the employee with MS. But how can you couch this? How can you say, this is going to help me to be more efficient or more productive? Just some examples to get you thinking. Adjustments in scheduling, having the ability to telecommute a couple days a week, taking breaks, utilizing different sorts of assistive technology, having a parking spot close to the door or close to the restroom. It can be basic things that don't cost a lot. As Roz mentioned before, fatigue and cognitive symptoms are two of the most commonly cited symptoms that lead a person to leave work, but they can be managed through the use of reasonable accommodations. And the last thing that you see here is be open to change. We know that as a younger person living with MS, you might want to change jobs. That's part of our life, is we change jobs, we change careers. So it's normal to be thinking about changing careers, but as a person with MS and a person working with MS, there are just a few more things now that you would want to take into consideration to make an informed choice about how to plan best for what your best career choice or your best job choice is. So we're going to talk about Shaquanda. You see here, she's 33 years old, was diagnosed with relapsing remitting MS about 4 years ago. She is single. She does not have any significant other. She's actively dating. She works for like an advertising firm. She was hired about 2 years ago, so she was hired post her diagnosis, but she has not yet disclosed. You see here some of the symptoms. She experiences fatigue, difficulty focusing, multitasking. She's contemplating quitting work because she's experiencing exacerbation and her symptoms really are flaring now. So you'll see on the polling, 4 different options. What do you think that Shaquanda should do first? Should she submit her 2-week notice that she plans to quit, disclose her MS and request some reasonable accommodations, take a 2-week vacation, see if she feels better, research the ADA, or get in contact with an employment attorney? Okay, so it looks like the majority of folks are, focusing on disclosing and requesting reasonable accommodations. What I truly appreciate is very few people were jumping the gun and saying contact an employment attorney or quit. Again, getting at that idea of you don't want to do anything rash, don't make a rash decision. So get informed. Part of disclosing might be also learning a little bit more about how the ADA does provide some legal protections, or kind of how to broach those protections. We included the take a 2-week vacation, even though that might seem a little bit of a silly answer, but from that idea, and it might not necessarily be a vacation, but again, could she maybe tap into the Family and Medical Leave Act to take that time off that she needs, to recuperate. The FMLA actually would allow a person to take up to 12 weeks leave. She wouldn't necessarily need that entire time. But what I love seeing here is, again, people are thinking about how disclosure and doing that education, requesting actually reasonable accommodations will hopefully help Shaquanda to stay employed for as long as she possibly can. So the last thing I want to talk about before actually resources, and then we'll get to your live questions, is just with all of these investments, we think that there's a common thread of communication. So Roz, I'm going to let you close us out on this.
Sure. Thanks, Steve. And I'm going to do this quickly because I know that we're going to run out of time soon. But in all of the investments you're making, as Steve said, communication is a common thread. You need to be thinking about what you want to say, to whom you want to say it, and how you want to say it. And so I think it's important for us to remember that we communicate in lots of different ways. Talking is obvious to all of us, but we also communicate in the way we act, our facial expressions, our body language, and increasingly with emails, texts, tweets. And so for all of you who may not have disclosed yet to your employer, I just want you to remember that anything that you post anywhere online is out there in the world forever. So as you're making very thoughtful decisions along the lines of what Steve was talking about, just remember that employers prowl through the internet, they prowl through chat boards and chat rooms and wherever. So be thoughtful about what you communicate in these different avenues. Remember that when you're talking to your family members, your healthcare providers, anybody that's important to you, that the communication involves both talking and listening, hearing and responding carefully to what the other people say, and think very carefully about what you want others to understand about your MS and your needs, and then think about how best to share that information. And that may be different with all of the important people in your life. You may have to communicate these things differently, and it takes some practice and thought to do that. And sometimes, particularly if you're having difficulty establishing communication with your partner or a parent or somebody else who's important, that's when a counselor can be very, very helpful to jumpstart that conversation and get it talking. And it's important to keep in mind, and this is probably one of my favorite things to say, that no matter how much somebody loves you, that person cannot read your mind. We like to believe that they can, and that love is enough, but it's not. We can't read each other's minds, and so we have to communicate our needs and feelings pretty carefully. And keeping it all locked inside and not talking is generally not a strategy for success. So we encourage you to think about your conversation, practice it, and get some help with it if you need to. And now we have several slides of resources for you, but I think we've talked about the National MS Society and the MS Navigator. Let's move on. And Steve, is there anything you want to say more about Jan?
No, I will just mention that again, you will get access to the slide deck. These are all linked in that. Again, I mentioned Jan, just an amazing resource, free confidential service, federally funded, been around since longer than actually the ADA. So they really are kind of the go-to source for legal protections, ADA protections, brainstorming, practical accommodation strategies. So I can't speak. I speak very, very highly of the folks at Jan.
Let's get to some questions, and we received a lot of questions about employment, so I'm glad that Steve is here. And you did such a good job of talking about how we talk to employers if and when we disclose, but we received a lot of questions about how to communicate with our coworkers. Especially people my age. It's very important to be part of the team and to be valuable and to not be different. And so one person in particular said they were concerned about looking like a slacker getting accommodations. Can you talk a little bit about how to deal with coworkers that don't understand maybe the day-to-day changes with MS, and any tips on kind of dealing with those anxieties?
Right. Yeah. And this is definitely a very natural concern to have. I will, just to piggyback off of what our common theme is, communication. What's important for the person with MS to think about is, how do they want to communicate this out to their coworkers? We can't say, yes, you should tell everybody, or no, you shouldn't. What is it that is going on at your workplace that makes you think that it might be beneficial to put it out there, and try to figure out the best way to broach the subject? The question about getting preferential treatment, from a legal perspective, I can say you have the right to request an accommodation, and it's truly nobody else's business. But we also know that people talk and people do notice things. So if this is kind of, if you as an employee feel like that people are talking, what I would want you to think about is, okay, so is it better to nip this in the bud and to let them know? Your employer is not going to do that, or they should not do that. Part of actually the ADA does deal with maintaining privacy of your information. So if you're provided an accommodation, your employer, your supervisor cannot talk about it necessarily with people, with the general population that you work with. So it's really that personal choice. Do I want to kind of come out to my coworkers? And if so, how do I do it? It doesn't need to be water cooler conversation. People can definitely pick and choose, who needs to know. I think that is definitely such a critical decision in terms of disclosure, kind of who needs to know. And sometimes people feel like that their coworkers might be in that need to know group. So I know that's not a direct answer, because honestly, every situation and every person, every person's employment is different. But what's important is for you to maintain who knows and what they know, for you to manage the communication, the flow of information, and the stream of communication. Roz, I don't know if you have something else to say too with that one.
I just want to add one thing, and that is, if you have made the decision to disclose to your employer and you have requested and received accommodations, but you're worried about how those are perceived by your fellow workers, that's exactly the time when that communication is so important, because it's your opportunity to educate a little bit. Oftentimes, colleagues don't understand it because so much of MS is invisible, right? So what they see is the tip of the iceberg, but all of the other symptoms you may be experiencing are below sea level, right? They can't see that horrible fatigue. They can't see your vision problems or your bladder urgency or things like that are not obvious. So when you explain and you teach what MS is about, and then you say, I know these accommodations look like I'm getting special treatment, but what they're actually doing is helping me be the best possible colleague and team member that I can be, so that I can keep up my end of the work, because I don't want it falling on you guys. So you educate, you explain that it's helping you be effective, and you're bringing them in. But that's only after you have disclosed to your employer and gotten those accommodations, if that kind of communication seems comfortable for you.
That's a great response. Thank you. Continuing with the work questions, we got a lot of concerns about different symptoms and how that may be affecting their work. And by far the most common issues were around cognition and speech, mixing up words and and the concerns around that. Any strategies for compensating cognitive or speech problems at work, or any of the resources that you mentioned that would be specifically helpful to kind of learning those compensation techniques?
Definitely. I'll start off with the resource question. Job Accommodation Network. Reach out to them. Again, they really can provide that concrete help to brainstorm practical accommodations. You can say, this is my job, these are my job duties, and these are the symptoms that I'm experiencing, not just cognitive, but whatever a person might be experiencing, and they can help brainstorm practical ways to manage. Cognitive, some of the low-tech things, just things like maintaining a to-do list. There are a lot of kind of built-in accessibility features into the computers nowadays in terms of the reminders and the bells and whistles. I was working with one person. I'll give kind of two quick kind of practical experiences. I was working with a person whose desk was she worked in a cubicle environment, and her desk was kind of like smack dab in the middle of a major thoroughfare where everybody was like walking by. And due to her cognitive symptoms, it was very easy for her to be distracted by the noise, by people walking by. There was a cube that was tucked away in the back corner of the office that nobody was actually using. And she requested to move to that quiet back cube. It made the world of difference because she wasn't distracted as much. Another quick example, I was working with somebody who, due to cognitive symptoms, the employer had a tendency of having these kind of the impromptu like hallway meetings. You're walking by somebody and say, hey, what's the status of this project? I need for you to do this now. She disclosed that she was having these challenges, and the employer kind of implemented a no hallway meeting rule. To minimize those kind of like on the cuff conversations, or if they did occur, to follow it up in writing, sending an email. And what they realized, again, this came out of just necessity in terms of helping to manage cognitive symptoms, but since they were able to like implement it across the entire company, everybody was being held more accountable for their work. So it started off as an accommodation for one person, but they realized that in fact it was benefiting the entire, the entire company. So there are practical things, wearing noise canceling headwear, or utilizing assistive technology is a great thing. The other thing too, and I'll just mention this too, cognitive symptoms, speech, seek out getting a professional evaluation. I would strongly encourage people, if you sense that this is going on, talk to your neurologist, get a referral to a speech language pathologist, get a referral to a neuropsychologist, get a handle of what's going on and figure out how those symptoms can actually be accommodated.
So I am going to add something onto that. The National MS Society is advocating at this point for every person with MS to have a baseline screening for cognitive function at the time of diagnosis and yearly thereafterward. So you can track what is happening with your cognition and sort of be proactive and on top of it. Asking for a referral to a speech language pathologist or a neuropsychologist, I think, is the best advice that we can possibly give you, because that person doing an evaluation looks at whatever cognitive challenges you're having, but also looks at your cognitive strengths. And it's based on both of those things that they can recommend the optimal accommodations for you to use in the workplace. So yes, there are lots of things that you can sort of intuit and figure out, how to be more organized, how to be less distracted, how to track the work you need to do. But I think having somebody like a speech language pathologist actually work through your issues one by one is the best way to figure out accommodations. And just a word, if if you are having significant cognitive issues and you foresee that cognitive problems may be a reason that you need to leave the workforce eventually, it is essential that you have that baseline and ongoing screening and that it's tracked in your medical record, so that if the time comes that you ever need to leave the workforce because of cognitive changes, the progression of your symptoms is tracked in the medical record, and then in order to apply for Social Security disability based on cognition, you must have a full neuropsych battery by a neuropsychologist. So that's just a bit of information to keep in your back pocket in case you ever need it.
It's great advice. Thank you. I thought this was an interesting question. When interviewing for jobs, we want to find out how welcoming and accommodating an employer will be without necessarily showing our full hand. So what questions should I ask during an interview to get a sense of how successful I will be with a certain company?
So I think some of that even starts when you're maybe applying with that company. Do your research, look online, see what they say about diversity and inclusion. Many, especially large employers, are proud of the work that they do in regard to like outreach to disability groups or to minority groups. So find that out. I can also mention that there are disability-friendly employers out there. There are disability-friendly job boards. The National MS Society does actually maintain one in collaboration with an organization that is called Direct Employers Association. Many times people that we work with might want to target their search, their job search, to employers that they know may be actively recruiting people with disabilities. The other thing too is, just when you're going on that interview, do a visual scan. Do you see people who have visible disabilities? Again, knowing that a lot of people may be living with disabilities that do not have visible symptoms, but do a scan, get a sense of what do their full benefits look like, because that is going to tell you a little bit about just how supportive that employer can be in terms of health insurance, disability benefits, those sorts of things, just in case sometime down the road a person with MS may need to avail themselves of that.
That's great advice. Thank you. Speaking of health insurance, got a lot of questions about that, and I think this is actually a good way to sort of wrap up our evening here talking about investments. So this question is, my biggest concern is that I'm going to make a financial decision that will lead to disaster for my family, especially as my disease progression affects my executive function and uncertainty with health insurance. I can't afford a financial planner. Any advice?
Yes.
Roz, do you want to start, and then I can chime in about what we can do with MS Navigator and at the National MS Society?
Well, I always tell people to call an MS Navigator and request a free financial planning consultation. There are disability planners, people who volunteer their time to help people figure out how they might want to plan for the unpredictable financial future. That is well worth your time to get that free consultation. Even the person who asked the question said that they couldn't afford a financial planner, but even if you could, I would encourage you to start with the society, because if you go through the yellow pages and you look under financial planners, those are not the people who have the expertise to advise a person with a disability. They are basically wealth planners. Their training is to help people with money to figure out how to invest it in ways that protect their savings so they can retire in the future. And what you need is somebody who specializes in disability law or in aging to help you figure out what potential expenses might be related to a chronic illness and how to plan around that. So start with your MS Navigator, get your first steps from that person who knows exactly what is going on, and then take it from there.
Right. And I'll just kind of piggyback, definitely. I mean, I was going to talk about definitely encouraging people to connect actually with an MS Navigator. We do actually have a partnership with an organization called the Society for Financial Service Professionals. And there's a program that is called the Financial Education Partners. So that's the program, I believe, that Roz, you were referencing. We as an organization also do have a pretty extensive booklet. It's more than a brochure because it's many pages long. That's really focusing on financial planning, really kind of doing a scan of your employer-sponsored benefits, your retirement plans, all those sorts of things, thinking proactively about your employment and budgeting for the future. And that's something that we would be more than happy to mail out to any of the constituents. And also we do maintain referrals to some of those other professionals, the elder care lawyers who might be able to work with someone to look at setting up a trust or those sorts of things. So definitely feel free to give us a call, connect actually with MS Navigator, and we can try to tailor the referrals based on what questions that you all are facing.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much, Roz and Steve, for all those resources and those little planting a seed that hopefully will pay positive dividends in the future. That's so important. And we thank everyone for joining us this evening. We want to tell you quickly about some other resources that you may find informative. We do a monthly IntelliLearning series every month, and so you can get some more information right from the comfort of your own home. If we didn't get to your question this evening, we have an Ask the Can Do team where you can submit your questions right online, and we'll pass it on to one of our programs consultants and try to get you an answer. And then we do in-person programs all over the country, so it's a great opportunity to learn more and to connect others going through similar journeys. So please stay involved with Can Do MS at cando-ms.org. Also on the Can Do MS website, as I mentioned, this is a 3-part webinar series. We also have a 3-part young adult podcast series on each of these topics. And so Channing Barker, who's a young person living with MS, will share her story along with Roz about all these topics and more. So you can go on to Apple Podcasts or wherever you get podcasts from and tune in to hear a little bit more of the human side from some of the issues and resources that we've been discussing during this young adult series. So please join us for that. Also on the Can Do MS website is something that we call Kick MS, and that's a way for you to be involved with Can Do MS and ensure that we can continue to put on free programs and free resources. You can do anything to raise money to help Can Do MS, get gifts for your birthday, take part in a run or walk, have a bake sale. The ideas are endless. And the best part is you'll be helping families just like yourself to get free access to programs. So visit the Can Do MS website for that. Also, if you're interested in more webinars, there's opportunities to donate specifically to our webinar series programs. And then finally, the last thing from Can Do MS resource perspective is something called MS Path to Care, which is a new set of resources that we've developed that really talks about shared decision making, a lot about the healthcare team forming that we talked about today, and building a strong support network. So please visit mspath2care.com for even more resources. And then finally, we actually are starting our brand new virtual program for newly diagnosed. That's coming up, and so you can sign up right online at cando-ms.org, and that's coming up on November 2nd. So that's specifically to those newly diagnosed with MS. I also want to reiterate, Steve brought up some great National MS Society resources, including the MS Navigator program, and we'll be sending you links on the PDF that you can connect to straight from there. We hope that you can join us next Thursday, October 17th, for part 2 of our 3-part series. This will be on staying active in an unfamiliar body. You are registered for all 3 webinars automatically, so you'll be receiving a reminder email next week. And we hope that you can join us. or watch the archived version. And lastly, the only way that we can know how we're doing with our programs is through your feedback. So as soon as I close out here, you're going to get a pop-up with a survey, and we'd appreciate any thoughts that you have on the information provided, any ideas or goals that some of the ideas that Steve and Roz brought up today, if that triggered anything, we'd like to know, and hopefully you can keep in touch. And with that, thank you again, Roz and Steve, for joining us. Any last words from our esteemed panel?
I always like working with Steve, and thanks everybody for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. We know Thursdays are busy. The Patriots are playing, so you should go watch that. And we will see you next Thursday. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good night.
Thanks, Brian.
Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.